a gentleman by the name of Sheldon Day. Sheldon, how are you doing this evening?
Well, good evening, Bill. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, we are pleased to have you on. For our viewers that don't know who you are, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this Planet X maelstrom, let's call it.
Sure, that'll be fine, Bill. Well, starting back in the early 90s, I started getting interested in all this UFO stuff and abductions and that, and I had been studying that up until maybe mid or late 2007, and then I had been listening to John Moore's show on Republic Broadcasting Network, and also following some of Professor Jim McCanney's work, and they were talking about this Planet X thing, and it was really starting to interest me, and it was actually John Moore that brought me to the realization that there is indeed a Planet X object that is inbound at this time. And well, then John Moore also had John DiNardo on as a guest from time to time, and John put me in touch with John DiNardo, and we've become very close friends. And all my research is indicating that this is indeed what's happening. This explains the very bizarre behavior being exhibited by our government officials at this time. I mean, they're spending money like there's no tomorrow, and they've been setting up these seed storage vaults around the world, and well, NASA's been spending billions and billions of dollars on all these telescopes. And why do they have the South Pole Telescope down in Antarctica, which is the coldest place on the planet, and far, far away from major population centers? Well, the reason for that is because the former supervising astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, Robert S. Harrington, who us Planet X researchers suspect was murdered, had put out information that Planet X was coming in to our solar system from the deep south. And well, this is why they have the South Pole Telescope down in Antarctica.
Okay. So, when did you get interested in this? When did you start doing your own show and really getting into this aspect of the science?
I would say it was about maybe the middle or towards the end of 2009. I just keep listening to what John Moore was putting out on it. But John Moore says that Planet X is like 4 times the size of the Earth. That was actually disinformation put out for the public because they don't want people to know that this thing is much more massive. It's actually a brown dwarf star. And even Robert Harrington, the supervising astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, had to feed some disinformation because otherwise he probably figured his life would have been threatened. Robert Harrington said that this thing will be coming in between the constellations of Scorpius and Sagittarius, which is roughly anywhere from, if you look at it, visualize the celestial sphere out there, coming in anywhere between right ascension 14 and 21 hours, and Harrington said roughly right ascension 18 hours is more like it. And here the elites have researchers looking out by the sun. They have them looking at other places. Well, the elites have hopelessly corrupted the sky viewing databases, so people stay confused as to where it's really coming in. But it's not Orion. They're trying to tell us it's Orion, but it's not the constellation of Orion.
Well, to simplify it for the for the average person, if you were, say, standing on the equator, and the Earth was maybe the size of your house, and you're standing on the equator, what direction would you be looking in? Would you be looking south? Would you be looking north?
Yeah, I believe at this time of the year, it's I think in the southeastern part of the sky, if memory serves correct. My friend Gilbert Erickson, he's another Planet X researcher. He's very good at explaining that better than I am. Okay.
In a few minutes, folks, we're going to bring in one of our other guests, and in the second hour, we're going to be joined by our friend Boris, who has been on a couple of times before. He is also a Planet X researcher. Have you heard about the effects that are going on with the sun? Have you heard I've seen some news stories over the past few weeks that scientists are, quote-unquote, puzzled about some of the effects that they're seeing with our sun. And I myself, I'm wondering if this might be related to the incoming Planet X, which the things that scientists are seeing is that the core of the sun is shrinking faster than they thought it was. There's a new type of solar particle that appears to be affecting the carbon-14 and pretty much all matter, and the sun is cooling and weakening all at the same time. Have you heard anything about that?
Oh yes, I've heard a lot. First of all, they're under-reporting the daily ultraviolet readings that they're feeding the masses out there. It's actually maybe 3, 4, or 5 points higher than what they're telling us, because there's a breach in the Earth's magnetic field that was discovered, I think, in 2007 by NASA's fleet of Themis spacecraft. That magnetic hole around the Earth is 10 times more than what they previously thought. Mm-hmm. And this is the primary reason the elites are going underground is because of the solar scorching that they're fearful of, because when Planet X comes in, it's going to cause the sun to flare out at some point. And another thing that they're not properly reporting is NASA is now expecting this solar max to occur in 2012 or 2013. I think the latest one they put out was 2013. Well, the solar max actually occurs every 11.5 years when Jupiter is at its closest point to the sun, and that actually happened back in March of this year when Jupiter was at its closest point to the sun. So there's a lot of misinformation being put out there because they just don't want us to know how bad it's going to get, of course. And also in the movie Knowing, I believe that movie Knowing, where it shows the Earth being scorched at the end, that's the movie with Nicolas Cage. Mm-hmm. I believe the producers of that film are subtly trying to warn the public what they know is going to eventually happen here.
Does he want to come in now? All right. We have our other guest calling on the landline. Go ahead and hang up the phone. We have our one of our producers is on the phone with our second special guest.
All right, I'm going to hang up now. He's going to get to you, John. All right, bye.
This is the first time we've ever had two guests, folks. And we're going to see if we can bring in a... hold on one moment while I attempt to do this. This is working out. I sound so professional when I do this, don't I? Okay, there we go. Let's see if this works. And we're waiting for the phone to ring, which of course it's not going to.
Did you want me to continue, Bill, while you work on
Yeah,
that?
go ahead. You go ahead and continue.
The person you have called at 973263848.
Okay. Well, we'll have to try that again in a minute. Go ahead, and we'll continue trying to get our other guest on the show. Go ahead and continue, Sheldon. We were talking about the new particles that are coming from the sun, the fact that the core is shrinking faster than what the scientists thought it would, and the cooling and weakening of the sun, and how Planet X may play into that. So you can go ahead and continue that while we attempt to continue to get our other guest.
Yeah, I'm suspecting, Bill, these are cover stories that the establishment is putting out because they don't want us to know how bad the sun is going to get at some point. You know, they show us these various apocalyptic scenarios on these motion picture films. I think it's because the elites themselves don't even know how bad things are going to get. They're using various avenues of...
Okay, here we go. Is this John DiNardo?
Yes, speaking.
You are on the air with Sheldon Day and me, Bill Zam. Welcome to Surrounded by Idiots.
Hi, Bill. It's a pleasure being with you and Sheldon.
Yes. Sheldon and I were just attempting to sound professional while we're on the air and getting you on the call as well. We were just talking about the observations of the sun that the astronomers have been having recently, where the core of the sun is shrinking faster than they thought. There's a new type of solar particle that appears to be mutating matter, and the sun is going into a cooling and weakening cycle. while all the while Planet X is coming in, and we were getting Sheldon's thoughts on that, and you can chime in at any time.
Oh, okay. I've been following the latest developments with the sun, but not real closely. The sun has gone through, maybe 2 years ago, around 2009, the sun went through an extraordinary, record-breaking period of quietness, where the number of sunspots and flares was less than it had ever been practically throughout recorded history. It was quite a worrisome situation. And I had theorized the only reason for this, at a time when we were expecting the sun to become hyperactive, the only reason for this would be that Planet X and its incoming gang of comets were passing through close enough to Jupiter to cause Planet X and Jupiter to discharge to one another, and would reduce the interaction between the normal interaction between Jupiter and the sun.
And hey John, to further back up your assertion there, back in 2009 we had an amateur astronomer down in Australia observe two separate events where asteroids were smashing into Jupiter, so that corresponds to what John's talking about there.
Right, and it was around July 20th, actually on July 20th of 2009, that Australian amateur astronomer Anthony Wesley photographed a comet crashing into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter during that extraordinary period of solar quiescence. And this is an extraordinary event, to see a comet crashing into Jupiter. It's not like, it's something that can be, that comet crash into Jupiter can be associated with Planet X, very likely, because prior to that they had rarely seen comets crashing into Jupiter. In fact, it was so unusual that the famous comet Shoemaker-Levy, its crash into Jupiter occurred back in the 90s, I believe, in the late 1990s, and that was an historic event. So
I believe that was 1993 or 94, John.
Oh, okay, right. And, well, incidentally, too, that was Eugene Shoemaker's wife, Carolyn, who had cited that comet crash. And just as an incidental point, many who have been following the subject believe that her husband, Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, a famed, worldwide famous geologist, was murdered in an accident, an automobile accident in Australia, I believe. Eugene Shoemaker was giving speeches to many scientists around the world about the increasing number of comets that were coming into our solar system and menacing Earth. And the power elite were doing everything they could to keep these scientists, highly credible people, quiet, so they would not stir up any awareness of this incoming planet, Comet X. Planet X.
John, as a side note, we also suspect that the former supervising astronomer Robert S. Harrington was also murdered. He died of esophageal cancer. Well, some people out there would say, well, yeah, that's because he was a pipe smoker. But the plates that were supposed to be analyzed for blink comparison of Planet X were never got to be scrutinized by anybody. So we suspect he was murdered too.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, he was about to release his findings of a historic sighting, telescopic sighting that he had ordered to be taken from one of the U.S. Naval Observatory's southern locations in Black Birch, New Zealand. And he had written a paper. In fact, that paper is available on the internet from Dr. Robert S. Harrington, published in October of 1991, wherein he stated that all of his calculations as to the location of the origin of this gravitational pull on the outer planets, were so far correct that he had no reason to suspect that there was any difference in the actual location. And he was so certain that he was dispatching a telescope, turned out to be an 8-inch telescope, to that southern location in Black Birch, New Zealand. In the paper, he said that the sightings, telescopic sightings, would be done by blink comparison, which would indicate any movement and the direction of movement of that particular object. Sightings had to be made from a southern location because the planet is coming in from below the ecliptic plane, below our our Earth.
Yeah,
And
he suspected that the angle of attack of it coming into the ecliptic would be, roughly 40 or 60 degrees, John?
around 40 degrees, and I believe he's correct. I mean, it shows, it's hard to estimate. We've heard different estimations of the angle at which this object is coming in below the ecliptic plane. That is that invisible disk in space on which all the planets rotate or revolve around the sun. And Dr. Harrington was probably correct when he said it was coming in at an angle of 40 degrees. 40 degrees would be sort of like if you could visualize a circular table and someone lying on the floor away from the table, off to the side, were to shoot a ball bearing with a slingshot up toward the underside of the table. You could visualize that the trajectory of that ball bearing would be, say, 40 degrees relative to the underside surface of that table being likened to the ecliptic plane, the invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. So that explains why the sightings of this planet always have to have been made from the southern hemisphere, very close to the South Pole. In fact, the government of the United States secretly constructed a multi-million-dollar building, which is the infrared South Pole telescope, right in the harshest conditions imaginable on our planet. And the South Pole, it's extremely difficult to build such an observatory on the South Pole and to maintain it. But it had to be done there because that was their best viewing location. And that fact, they went through extraordinary difficulties in erecting this South Pole telescope, that's another fact that points to all the evidence that adds to the knowledge that this planet is coming in from below the ecliptic plane, and it's approaching, and the government is so concerned and worried about it that they've kept the subject secret. They have murdered the chief astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., Dr. Robert S. Harrington, who had stated that he was about to reveal his analysis of those photographic plates after May and June of the year 1992. And then nothing happened, and as Sheldon said, the plates were just disappeared. They were somehow, well, maybe not disappeared, but the evidence of the photographic plates was kept absolutely secret ever since then, even though should have been revealed, even though the man had died. Dr. Harrington had died of cancer in January of 1993. They never revealed the contents of those plates, so that proves that there was foul play involved.
So they just basically vanished.
Yes, I mean, those plates, whether they have them kept secret or whether they've destroyed them, it's more or less very much like the Kennedy assassination. So much evidence has been destroyed or kept secret because there was a murder involved.
Well, it even gets heavier than this, John, because the Vatican has also deployed telescopes like the one down here in Mount Graham in Arizona, and even Father Malachi Martin appeared on the Art Bell show back in, I believe, the end of '97, or sometime in '97 or '98, and shortly after that interview, he had died from going down a flight of stairs.
We actually have the Father Malachi interview with Art Bell available right now. We can listen to that clip, if you guys are ready for that.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on just a second. We're going to go ahead and play that.
Knowing the future doesn't help one's peace of mind, And I remember I had the dubious privilege of reading the text of the third secret of Fatima, which I must guard by oath from repeating, but it isn't pleasant.
I have a whole stack of faxes here asking me to ask you about that, and you obviously cannot speak of that.
Not factually, not word for word. I can't, I took a note. But it ain't pleasant. The less you know about it, the better. Except that there is going to be a reckoning, and that nobody existing on the face of this earth will be exempt from knowing the power from on high. They will interpret it in different ways.
That stands to reason.
According
to their beliefs.
That's right, and their culture and their bias. And there will be people who, even faced with the certainty that there is a greater power above our heads, will say,
They will deny it. They will.
They'll reject it.
The scientists, for example, will find a scientific explanation for it.
They will. Remember the famous so-called Aurora Borealis in 1938?
Well, I certainly am aware of Aurora Borealis, but not one specific.
There was a specific one which they explained by saying Aurora Borealis, but it really wasn't that at all. They all agreed it wasn't Aurora Borealis. The only one who put his finger on it was Adolf Hitler.
And he said what?
Well, he was in Berchtesgaden at the Wolf's Lair. That was his famous place when for weekends with his cabinet. And Speer, Albert Speer, who was a member of his cabinet, his architect, tells us in his second book that night they all stood on the esplanade of his villa in the Bavarian mountains, looking out to the east and seeing these extraordinary sights of light. And Hitler said, "Yeah, nun, now we have to shed blood. We didn't shed blood in taking the Tsar, we didn't shed blood in taking Czechoslovakia, but now we're going to shed blood."
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Father Malachi on the Art Bell show. I believe this was 14 years ago when he was on there. And I believe, John, you have some more information about this particular appearance and what happened to Father Malachi immediately after he was on the Art Bell show and made these statements.
Well, I don't know if it was immediately. I think Malachi Martin died in 1999, but it was shortly after he had made the statements. I don't recall what was the date of these statements on the Art Bell show. I know there were others around close to 1999. So it seems like it definitely was his death was a consequence of the statements he was making about this incoming celestial body. And I recall there was another famous statement that he made on Art Bell, which many of us have recorded also. Where,
I couldn't hear it that well. It sounded pretty muffled, but the one that me and you are thinking of was given in 97 or 98, and Malachi talked about an object out there that could be here in another 5, maybe another 10 years. Well, the 10 years has already passed, but just because the bus has not gotten here yet does not mean it doesn't exist.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was everybody was early in their predictions, but Malachi Martin had said to Art Bell on this other shorter clip that was not played here, he said that well, let me try to paraphrase what was said, because I recall it pretty clearly. Art Bell said to Malachi Martin, why is it that the Vatican has muscled into an observatory, built an observatory and muscled their way into Mount Graham in Arizona? And I do mean muscle their way in. Why is it have they built this observatory in Arizona? And Malachi Martin said, it's because the highest echelons of the Catholic Church know that something is approaching Earth in the next 5 to 10 years. He was a little early with his prediction, but nonetheless, the prediction itself was very worrisome and would have caused great panic. Coming from a man of high esteem, Malachi Martin had 3 doctoral degrees. He had been an advisor to several popes, and he was, again, anyone with high credibility, such as Malachi Martin, or an astronomer, a world-class astronomer such as Dr. Robert S. Harrington, if they were to reveal such information that would cause the public to panic and cause the power elite to lose their manipulative control over the public, then the power elite would certainly be prone to murdering those people because they're credible. People like you and I, we're a little bit safer because we don't have that high credibility quotient that people like an advisor to a pope, Malachi Martin, would have, or one of the most esteemed astronomers in the world, Dr. Robert S. Harrington, would have. Those people get murdered easily. Or worldwide famed geologists such as Dr. Eugene Shoemaker. All 3 of these people it's pretty obvious that they were murdered.
Well, John, if you recall, earlier this year, we also had the guy that runs I believe it's called the Minor Planet Center, where they catalog all these new comets and asteroids coming in, that Dr. Brian Marsden. They're trying to tell us that he died of natural causes, but they can induce death from remotely onto people too.
Oh yeah, they have very advanced techniques for murdering people. As we know, they have. If you look at President Clinton, while Bill Clinton was president, there's a whole long litany of body counts, bodies that happen to deaths that occurred. It's called the Clinton body count, and many of them were killed from means such as, medical conditions, etc. There was one man, James McDougal, who died in prison from some kind of an injection. He was about to testify against Bill Clinton, but the point is that they have sophisticated means of killing people. Anyway.
They also have sophisticated means utilizing mind control on the Planet X researchers like Mark Hazelwood, who was one of the first ones out there openly talking about this. And, well, here he got transcendental meditation, and that allows the elites to get into people's minds when they get into those types of meditation.
Right. I'm a little bit reluctant to name names, but that's true. It seems that they're able to change. I've seen people change from being active researchers, very vocal researchers, who reach many people with their information that is desired to be kept secret by the power elite. And I've seen those personalities change. With one particular author, he was very vocal in warning the world about Planet X way back around up to the year 2002 or 2003, and then he suddenly became silent. And when asked to do interviews, he refused. Also, there is another astrophysicist, and I'm not going to name any names, but somebody who's been speaking about Planet X, and now he is very reluctant to talk about it. Then we have people whom we can name, such as you said, Brian Marsden, Dr. Brian Marsden, who was the head of the Smithsonian Planetary Institute, and he had speculated that yes, we do have these comets coming into our solar system. Brian Marsden died. We don't know how he died. It's always a secret. They keep it secret from us, but this is at a crucial point now where some high-level people could be speaking because Planet X is coming in. More and more people are finding out about it, and now we have the death of two famous people. One was Dr. Brian Marsden, I think about a year ago, and the other was Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, who was an associate of the murdered Dr. Harrington. So, I mean, they would not hesitate to knock people off left and right because, just think about it. The power elite, they survive and maintain their power and wealth by keeping people's minds controlled, manipulated, and keeping them in fear. When the people find out that there is a superhuman, supernatural force of a brown dwarf star, conservatively estimated to be at least 1,000 Earth masses, which would exert a gravitational force strong enough as it passes by Earth on its way toward its gravitational rendezvous with the Sun. This brown dwarf star would exert a force upon planet Earth temporarily during its passage that would molest the crustal surface of Earth and its electromagnetic field, but also terribly damage Earth in many ways. It would engulf Earth in a very powerful magnetic field that would actually cause destruction of the power grid as well as electronic equipment. And I know from my work as a physics teacher and as an electrical engineer and electronic circuit designer, that when anything is engulfed in a very strong magnetic field, that field can actually produce electrical currents through a conductive object, what they call a magnetically permeable object, such as Earth's partially metal mantle and Earth's mostly molten iron core. And it's like a microwave oven. We see that principle in effect every day when we use a microwave oven. You put some food in there that has moisture in it, and that food inside the chamber is bombarded with electromagnetic waves that heat up the food. So we know that electromagnetic waves do heat up.
Hey, John.
Objects.
Some of our viewers have been asking in the chat room what the time frame for these occurrences are, as far as we know right now.
Okay, well, we don't. It's very difficult, but we can use the Bible. Bible prophecy has shown to be accurate, even in the past. And we know the Bible tells us that there will definitely be 42 months of great tribulation, and that a man will rise to power to rule the entire world, and he will be called the Antichrist. In the Bible, he's called the Antichrist. We don't know who he is. It could be Barack Obama or someone else who rises to power. We know there is a great push for a one-world government. So the Bible, so far, its prophecies are turning out to be true. That there will be a one-world government.
It could even end up being the injured congresswoman down here in Tucson, Gabby Giffords, because somewhere in the Bible it talks about somebody that miraculously recovers from a gunshot wound to the head, and another researcher here in Tucson, he believes that it may end up being revealed that she's the Antichrist.
Well, it's possible, but the Bible does say it's a man. It calls it the Antichrist, the he. We don't know who it is, and I wouldn't even venture to speculate. I mean, some people would say it might be Obama because he has such charisma. Right? Actually, you know, this is getting off the subject a little bit, and I'll try to get back to the question real quickly. But anyone who is going to become the Antichrist to rule the world will do it under a very powerful demonic spirit. So even though we know that Obama is sort of a bumbler and a clown at this point, when that demonic spirit indwells a person, that person changes. He's got the shell of the ability, the shell of the Antichrist spirit. And I don't want to suggest that it is Obama, but he certainly has that narcissistic personality, that grandeur, that maniacal personality. So when he's indwelled by a demonic spirit, he'll change. So anyway, we know some Antichrist is now rising to power. The power elite are struggling desperately to get a one-world government, and they're going to do it by trying to create such a conflict that the nations will be in a shambles after this war, and the people will cry out for world peace, and that's how they will institute this one world government under a pretended one world peaceful leader. Okay, so getting back to the question, how much time do we have? This Antichrist will rule for 3.5 years during a period of great tribulation. So there will be wars while this tribulation is going on. There'll be wars, and then the Antichrist will take over. All I could say is we've got more than 3.5 years before we reach what may well be the very total destruction of all civilizations on Earth. We got more than 3.5 years according to the Bible. Now, where's Planet X right now? It's hard to tell, but I believe many people are now seeing that it could very well be up around Saturn, because we have storms occurring right now in the northern hemisphere of Saturn. How could this happen? Well, if you could try to visualize that circular table that I just described before, and that ball bearing being fired from below the table off to the side, coming up, it penetrates the underside of the table. That's the ecliptic plane, not in the center, but out near Jupiter. Historically, ancient historians have told us that when this planet came through in the past, 36.5 centuries ago, it came through between the orbital path of Jupiter and the orbital path of the asteroid belt. So if this thing is coming up through those between the asteroid belt, which is beyond Mars and Jupiter, then it penetrates. It's going to go above the ecliptic plane as it penetrates the ecliptic plane, but continue going further out toward the edge of that table. That it would be over the top of the table now instead of underneath, and that would explain why you have this huge, unprecedented storm on Saturn right now. But in the process, it's making a big loop around. It's being pulled in by the sun. Remember, the sun is what drew it in the first place, the gravitational force of the sun. And that's pulling it around to make a big loop. So that loop is going to be kind of slow, because now it's decelerating. It's slowing down because the sun has overshot the sun. The sun is trying to pull it back again. And so it has to go from one direction, it has to change directions and make a big U-turn. And you know, as sort of a visual example, if you ever had to make a sharp U-turn on a highway after going like 60 miles an hour, you'd have to slow that vehicle down quite a bit to make that U-turn. Well, that's sort of what happens with this planet. It could be like a couple years before it actually starts passing over the top of Earth's orbital path, and that's when we're going to really experience the very close proximity and the devastating gravitational and magnetic effects of this planet here on Earth.
Let me ask you a question, John. On the screen right now for the viewers, I have some of the Tucson images that people have been taking. Is this part of that system?
It could well be. You know, if I've seen a number of them, and it's just too many of those two-sun images that we have seen over the past year to attribute it to some kind of mirage or falsehood. I think it's just by the sheer number and the diversity coming from different nations. These photographs of two suns indicate that it is true. Now, this might explain it. This is something that comes to mind as to how we could explain it. If Planet X's were, like, for example, I'm looking out my bedroom window now, facing the front of my house, and I'm looking out and there's a street light right in front of my house. If I were to hold an orange in my outstretched hand, right in my line of sight of that lamp looking out my window, it would appear, let's say that orange were the sun, and the street light 65, 70 feet out in front of my house is in line with that orange. It would appear that street light is right next to the orange, wouldn't it? So it might appear that Planet X is right next to the sun, even though its distance from the sun is much farther. So we could be looking out toward it at its position far out into the solar system. However, what is going to happen if you're on a revolving turntable like we are on planet Earth revolving around the sun? What will happen is, as the months go by and you go from one season to another, what's going to happen is that you'll be looking at the sun. Now rotate your arm. You've got that outstretched orange in your hand. In your outstretched hand, I'm sorry, you got that orange in your outstretched arm. And as you rotate the orange around, the sun, or that street lamp, is no longer, I'm using the wrong term, Planet X, or that street lamp, is no longer in your line of sight with the orange, but it's off to the side. So if my theory is correct, it doesn't seem like it would be correct, as we go through the seasons, that second sun will no longer be in line, or that Planet X object will no longer be in line with the sun. Can you visualize that?
Yes, but it would be moving.
Right, because we are rotating around the sun,
right,
and my arm is still rotating with me, and that orange is still rotating. Now I've turned around with my back to the streetlight now, and I'm still looking at that. I'm looking toward the inside of my house, and, looking at that orange in my outstretched arm, which is the sun, and the streetlight is to my back. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think that object could not actually be near the sun, because if it were, imagine the electrical excitations that would occur. I mean, we know that this is where the peak of the disasters are going to occur, when this object loops over the top of the sun and gets so close that it causes the sun to put out deadly coronal mass ejections and flares, so great, X-rays, all kinds of arcing, it's what they call sprites, all kinds of electrical activity that will cause solar scorching on Earth, that will knock out the power grids, likely scorch all life on Earth, on the surface of the Earth. So, and John, I'm sure that object is not actually near the sun. If it were, we would be dead by now.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Can I cut in there, John?
Sure.
Well, I'd like to also point out that our solar system has been undergoing violent climate change for many years now. NASA's been spending billions of dollars on all these probes to go study Mars. That's probably because of the climate change going on at Mars. And as for the date thing, when is this thing going to get here? That's one of the most popular asked questions. Well, according to John Moore, one of his highly classified sources said back at the end of 2009, the continuity of government contingency planning had up until that time to finalize preparations with their underground shelters for this event. Any time after that is just privileged time to be alive, and they'll continue to prepare it up until the last minute, even though they're already fully prepared. And what me and John here think is going on is why this thing hasn't gotten here yet is because God is actually slowing the inbound progress of this dwarf star down to give us humanity a little more time to wake up. Go ahead, John.
It makes sense though. When you look at that, I liken, if you can visualize, the trajectory of this comet. I have surmise from studying it that the trajectory is sort of like if you were to take a cucumber, look at the outline of a cucumber. That might be a good representation of the trajectory of this object. It has always been stated for many years by all researchers that it's on a cometary orbit. We know from ancient history that it's on a long cometary orbit, which is elliptical, and that would be like the outline of a cucumber. And if you would hold that cucumber at a very acute angle to, say, the underside of a dish, okay, that dish representing that invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun, and the cucumber its outline representing the cometary elliptical trajectory of planet X. You could see that when the cucumber, if it were to penetrate through the bottom of the dish, its curvature at the very end would be the loop around that we're talking about, where it would go through the orbital path between the asteroid belt and Jupiter, and then continue traveling out further toward the outer section of the dish, or the ecliptic plane, and then thus they would take it right basically over the Saturn's orbital ring or orbital path, and it would have to slow down because it's making a big loop around. You see, another comparison would be someone running toward you, and you're pulling that person. Okay, let's take a fish. You're fishing, okay, and you're reeling in this huge fish, and you're exerting a pulling force on the fish, and you're causing that fish to accelerate because you're exerting this pulling force along the fish line itself. Well, that line would represent the trajectory, the gravitational pulling line of the sun pulling planet X, reeling that big fish, planet X, in toward the sun, the fisherman being the sun. But as the fish gets over the fisherman's head, what happens? The fisherman is no longer pulling the fish toward him. The fish is actually overshooting the fisherman, and now the fisherman has to pull back on the line, causing that fish to decelerate and loop around, and that's exactly what's happening with this planet. So it's going to take longer than we expected for it to loop around and make that big U-turn over the orbital paths of the inner planets, first over the orbital path of Jupiter, then the asteroid belt, then over the orbital path of Mars, then over the orbital path of Earth, and so on until it loops over the top of the sun and is catapulted back down through the ecliptic plane, below the ecliptic plane, and back out into space for another long 36.5 century journey.
I actually have
visualize that.
I actually have a cometary orbit on the screen for the viewers to see.
Well,
right
John,
now.
I'd also like to add that back to the issue of the solar storms that we know are coming soon. Not only in the movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage are the producers of the movie trying to subtly warn the public without fully telling us, because they have a code of ethics whereby, there's, at least they told us so, even though they're not telling us the full truth. But we also have Jesse Ventura, former Minnesota governor, and his film crew. He aired a 2-season thing called what are those
Apocalypse
called?
2012.
Yeah, the specific episode he aired was called Apocalypse 2012. It aired on True TV, and Jesse Ventura and his film crew went to into the bowels of Cheyenne Mountain and also visited the Denver airport, whereby they also talked about these solar storms that will be coming, but they never get to the root of what's going to cause the solar storms. I suspect Jesse Ventura is part of the establishment, but he is trying to leak it out to us without getting killed.
Yeah, he's done a good job of bringing out this crucial information. So, when people say when, I say it's coming soon. And here's the thing about it. It's not like you would turn on a light bulb, and when the light bulb is off, everything is fine, and as soon as it's switched on, you have total devastation. No, it's more like a dimmer switch on a light. The light is gradually getting brighter. It's going from a state of a dim state, to a gradually brighter. Day by day, it's getting brighter and brighter. Well, this object and the catastrophic events on Earth are gradually increasing day by day. The flooding is getting worse. The windstorms are getting worse, more frequent and more severe. The earthquakes becoming more frequent and more severe gradually, day by day. So we're in a period where we have to prepare, and the news is even worse than waiting for that day in total comfort. We're in danger and in disaster mode right now. Many people have suffered. Many people have died so far. I've been keeping track of the disasters by videotaping severe weather reports from the Weather Channel, and I've got like 250 hours of nothing but severe weather reports from the Weather Channel. I can recount some of the disasters really quickly to show you that this thing is ramping up, and if you watch what's happening. For example, do you know that there was snow in Jerusalem a couple of years ago? It was in the springtime, snow in Jerusalem. We've had epic flooding in many parts of the U.S., in the upper Midwest along the Mississippi. Even in what's now drought-stricken Texas, we had horrific floods several years back. I've got that all on videotape. Terrible floods in Washington State, even Arizona. You got a dry state like Arizona, New Mexico, flooding occurring frequently. California, flooding. Go ahead, Sheldon.
Well, John, I wanted to throw in what the historians of the ancient Mesopotamian text stated, that when this celestial object came in, there were massive inundations of flooding around the planet, and that's what we've been seeing. And they've also been as decade by decade goes by, the earthquakes are getting a lot stronger, and they've become so strong that now they're even under-reporting them by one full magnitude number.
Right. Zechariah Sitchin. You're referring to Zechariah Sitchin in his landmark book, The 12th Planet, where he does talk about this Planet X, and he uses the name Nibiru, which is the name that was given to this brown dwarf star when it came in 2 or 3 orbits ago, many thousands of years ago. And
that would have been Atlantis, wouldn't it?
Right. Well, let's see now. If we go back, Atlantis would be around, most researchers believe, I think some of the best researchers, such as the Horizon Project, believe that the sinking of Atlantis was around 9,000 BC. Now, we know that one orbital period of Planet X, or Nibiru, is 36.5 centuries. So if you go back 36.5 centuries times 3 orbits, you land on around 9,000 BC, and that's when this brown dwarf star caused the sinking of Atlantis. Then that would have been 3 orbits ago. 2 orbits ago would have been the great flood of Noah's day. And
but
1 orbit ago would have been the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And that's when the great flooding is recorded by the historians to have been one of the first signs of disaster.
But John, the Bible says that then this go around at Planet X, we won't be destroyed by flooding. It'll be incineration this time, which we're attending this.
Right, that's what the Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 3, that the world will be destroyed by fire. However, leading up to it, we've got a whole variety of cataclysms, one of which is flooding, because it always does cause flooding. And of course,
there will be a lot of flooding, but the majority will be solar storm.
Well, the majority will be what?
Well, there will still be a lot of flooding, but the majority of this current event coming up will be incineration.
Right. See, it's a matter of it's a process or a progression that occurs as the planet gets closer. And I could show you the documentation. The National Weather Service maps, weather maps are very convincing, and it's clear documentation on those weather maps that what is happening is this incoming brown dwarf star is causing the jet stream to become severely undulated. Now, the jet stream historically has been rather horizontal. It's the flow of air along the northern hemisphere, which goes from west to east. And there's also a jet stream in the southern hemisphere, but we'll just deal with the jet stream in the northern hemisphere because that's the one that we see on television on the Weather Channel. The jet stream, you might liken it to the U.S.-Canadian border, which is essentially the borderline is rather horizontal with a little bit of a concave dip to it, and that was historically what the jet stream pattern used to be, and that would
a gentleman by the name of Sheldon Day. Sheldon, how are you doing this evening?
Well, good evening, Bill. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, we are pleased to have you on. For our viewers that don't know who you are, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into this Planet X maelstrom, let's call it.
Sure, that'll be fine, Bill. Well, starting back in the early 90s, I started getting interested in all this UFO stuff and abductions and that, and I had been studying that up until maybe mid or late 2007, and then I had been listening to John Moore's show on Republic Broadcasting Network, and also following some of Professor Jim McCanney's work, and they were talking about this Planet X thing, and it was really starting to interest me. And it was actually John Moore that brought me to the realization that there is indeed a Planet X object that is inbound at this time. And well, then John Moore also had John DiNardo on as a guest from time to time, and John put me in touch with John DiNardo, and we've become very close friends. And all my research is indicating that this is indeed what's happening. This explains a very bizarre behavior being exhibited by our government officials at this time. I mean, they're spending money like there's no tomorrow, and they've been setting up these seed storage vaults around the world. And well, NASA's been spending billions and billions of dollars on all these telescopes. And why do they have the South Pole Telescope down in Antarctica, which is the coldest place on the planet and far, far away from major population centers? Well, the reason for that is because the former supervising astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, Robert S. Harrington, who us Planet X researchers suspect was murdered, had put out information that Planet X was coming in to our solar system from the deep south. And well, this is why they have the South Pole Telescope down in Antarctica.
Okay. So, when did you get interested in this? When did you start doing your own show and really getting into this aspect of the science?
I would say it was about maybe the middle or towards the end of 2009. I just keep listening to what John Moore was putting out on it. But John Moore says that Planet X is like 4 times the size of the Earth. That was actually this information put out for the public because they don't want people to know that this thing is much more massive. It's actually a brown dwarf star. And even Robert Harrington, the supervising astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, had to feed some disinformation because otherwise he probably figured his life would have been threatened. Robert Harrington said that this thing will be coming in between the constellations of Scorpius and Sagittarius, which is roughly anywhere from, if you look at it, visualize the celestial sphere out there, coming in anywhere between right ascension 14 and 21 hours, and Harrington said roughly right ascension 18 hours is more like it. And here the elites have researchers looking out by the sun. They have them looking at other places. Well, the elites have hopelessly corrupted the sky viewing databases, so people stay confused as to where it's really coming in. But it's not Orion. They're trying to tell us it's Orion, but it's not the constellation of Orion.
Well, to simplify it for the for the average person, if you were, say, standing on the equator, and the Earth was maybe the size of your house, and you're standing on the equator, what direction would you be looking in? Would you be looking south? Would you be looking north?
Yeah, I believe at this time of the year, it's I think in the southeastern part of the sky, if memory serves correct. My friend Gilbert Erickson, he's another Planet X researcher. He's very good at explaining that better than I am. Okay.
In a few minutes, folks, we're going to bring in one of our other guests, and in the second hour, we're going to be joined by our friend Boris, who has been on a couple of times before. He is also a Planet X researcher. Have you heard about the effects that are going on with the sun? Have you heard? I've seen some news stories over the past few weeks that scientists are, quote-unquote, puzzled about some of the effects that they're seeing with our sun. And I myself, I'm wondering if this might be related to the incoming Planet X, which the things that scientists are seeing is that the core of the sun is shrinking faster than they thought it was. There's a new type of solar particle that appears to be affecting the carbon-14 and pretty much all matter, and the sun is cooling and weakening all at the same time. Have you heard anything about that?
Oh yes, I've heard a lot. First of all, they're under-reporting the daily ultraviolet readings that they're feeding the masses out there. It's actually maybe 3, 4, or 5 points higher than what they're telling us, because there's a breach in the Earth's magnetic field that was discovered, I think, in 2007 by NASA's fleet of Themis spacecraft. That magnetic hole around the Earth is 10 times more than what they previously thought. And this is the primary reason the elites are going underground is because of the solar scorching that they're fearful of, because when Planet X comes in, it's going to cause the sun to flare out at some point. And another thing that they're not properly reporting is NASA is now expecting this solar max to occur in 2012 or 2013. I think the latest one they put out was 2013. Well, the solar max actually occurs every 11.5 years when Jupiter is at its closest point to the sun, and that actually happened back in March of this year when Jupiter was at its closest point to the sun. So there's a lot of misinformation being put out there because they just don't want us to know how bad it's going to get, of course. And also in the movie Knowing, I believe that movie Knowing, where it shows the Earth being scorched at the end, that's a movie with Nicolas Cage. I believe the producers of that film are subtly trying to warn the public what they know is going to eventually happen here.
Does he want to come in now? All right. We have our other guest.